right, good afternoon and good morning, everyone. This is Rich Bendixson from Dashboard Gear. We're going to be doing a session today on supply chain analytics. I am making a recording of the session for future reference. So in case any of you have to drop off, we'll have that on our website under the Resources tab. Thank you all for taking the time to join. What we're going to talk about today is supply chain analytics. As we're going through it, if you do have any questions at any time, feel free to use the chat or QA facilities that are part of WebEx, and I'll answer those. And I'll pause once in a while just for questions if anything should come up. I like to make it as interactive as possible, and that's a little bit difficult when we have a lot of people, but I will stop and look at the questions and chat. Give you a little background on Dashboard Gear without getting too deep into that. Dashboard Gear is a vendor that we've been providing business intelligence and reporting solutions for the loss and Infor space since 2007. We have over 200 customers that are using our product to assist them with the reporting on the Infor tool set, as well as Kronos is another one we've added. So those of you that have Kronos from an HR perspective, we do have a similar solution for that. In addition to our products, we've got a full consulting team, and we do everything from consulting on everything business intelligence reporting, whether you're using Crystal Reports or LBI or IBI, or now we're a brand new, just signed an agreement to become an alliance partner with Infor for the Burst product set, so we'll be doing that as well. So we have Burst, IBI, LBI, as well as we're a partner of Microsoft. So we have expertise in SQL Server and Power BI if you're using any of those tool sets. We do have some people that also know a little bit about Tableau or ClickView or some other tools if you're using those, but everything reporting and analytics. We can start by, I'll just give you an overview a little bit about our tool because we get a lot of questions on that. I'm not going to make this too much about specifically on our tool. I'm going to try and talk about some theories on supply chain and what makes that difficult, some of the best practices that you can go through. One of the difficulties in creating reports, obviously, is the whole table structure within Infor Loss, and on the S3 side for supply chain is pretty complex. I just got asked a question this morning, you know, where would you do the different timelines when we're doing an implementation for reporting between finance, HR, and supply chain? And quite honestly, the finance is the easiest, HR is second, and supply chain is the most difficult. And part of the reason for that is the way the table structures are, and I'll get into quite a bit into that. And if you do have any specific questions when we get into it of where to find something or how to do that, I'll be happy to answer those. The second part is almost everywhere we go, people do it slightly different from a reporting and analytics on supply chain. And what I mean by that is some places will do like service charges. They only want to consider them expenses when they're actually invoiced. Other places it'll be we want to see it when they go in the PO. Other places it'll be only want to see expenses when the PO items are actually received. Sometimes it's just when they're issued. So it's kind of across the board on the rules that we follow. So what we try to do is have a platform that is as flexible as possible to account for all those different variations. And I'll get into some of those deep things here in a minute. But what we do at Dashboard Gear is we're not a front-end reporting tool. So I mentioned earlier we have partnerships with Infor for Burst, and we have Crystal and Power BI and SQL reporting services, Excel. We're not a front-end tool to build the reports. Instead, what we do is we sit between those tools in your Lawson or Infor database, or Kronos database or whatever, and make that data set easier to work with. So rather than you trying to create reports directly on your Infor product, we make that data set easier to work with. You then connect Burst to our dash or our data mart or Infor BI or whatever tool you happen to be using onto our data mart, and it makes that much easier. Now I'm going to do a bunch of examples today using Excel, and then I'm also going to use a tool called SQL Reporting Services to build some reports and show some things, but you don't have to. Anything that you can use from a reporting tool, you can do that. What we do when we're building those data marts and those connectors, I'm starting to use the term connector, where we're a connector to your Infor data, is we first put that data into what we call a reporting data mart, and that's the item in orange. We then take that data mart data, and we create what are called cubes on it. Now, there's a lot of tools out there that will work better on cubes, and some work better on a data mart. It just depends. That's why we build both of them. And the reason for that is data is best navigated in either a cube or a data mart, but usually there's a use case that works better in one or the other. So you really do need both. Cubes are very good at asking questions of the data. They're not very good at getting a lot of details. And that's where it comes in on the supply chain side. What I find is, for whatever reason, and you all know better than me, that when you're building reports and dashboards, you want a lot of details when it comes to supply chain. It's not that you want to see what did you spend by vendor. You do, but you want to see what did I spend by vendor, and I want to see all the POs and invoices that make that number up. You always want to get to the details for some reason. So what we have in our product is the ability to have the summary data and kind of ask questions of the data using cubes, but we have all the details in the reporting data mart. So you're able to see what all those invoices and POs are, and get back down to that base detail level. So what I'd like to do when I'm going through this is start out by showing some examples using Excel against cubes, to where you can just ask questions of that data and kind of get at it, and that's where cubes really shine. So if you've heard the term cube, just know it's a type of database that allows you to ask questions of that data and kind of interact with it as we go from there. So what I'm going to do here, I think that's the next part. The next slide, I don't have many slides, but I do have a few. This next slide is just saying what some of the tools are. We surveyed our customer a while back, and I do this periodically, what reporting tools they're using. And as you can see, it's all over the board. And from our standpoint, we really don't care. We're about making the best experience of the data as easy as possible across these tools. So about half of our customers were using Crystal, and those of you in the Infor space know that the reason for that is Lawson, I still say Lawson, had resold that and packaged that as part of their LBI tool, which was pretty widely adopted. So that's by far the number one. And then it branches out into all different flavors, just depending on where in the life cycle. And we're just starting to see, I'd mentioned Burst earlier as a new product from Infor, fall into this mix. And that works really good with our data marts. So I'm going to just hit escape here, and I'm going to go over to this reporting tool, which I'm willing to bet that most of you have used at one point or another. Well, the nice thing about Excel is it has built into it the ability to query cubes. So what we do at Dashboard Gear is part of our process that runs, we generate a library of cubes. And what a cube is really like a model that sits on the database for a specific subject area. So we have cubes for accounts payable, we have cubes for purchase orders, we have cubes for requisitions and inventory, we've got one for distribution, we've got some for general ledger and so forth across the board. And then we have one we call our supply chain master, which tries to pull all of that stuff together into one, which is a big challenge. But I'm going to walk through maybe for a cube example here. If I go up to the data menu, built into Excel, if I say get data from other sources and I go to analysis services, that's the engine that runs cubes. Now, what I'm going to do is you'd go through and you'd click that, on yours, and you put in your server name, and it would just say use Windows Authentication, and it will give you a list of cubes you can see. Once you do that once, though, on your machine, it saves that connection, so you don't have to do it again for each cube. So I'm just going to hit cancel because obviously on my laptop here, I've connected many times to cubes. So I'm going to go to just the first cube I'll show, which is a PO cube. Now, what we do at Dashboard Gear when we implement is we start out with what we call a base implementation. And what that is we put in the most common kind of things that people have wanted to know about their data when they come in. When we first started implementing Dashboard Gear, we'd go through a process of asking all kinds of questions of what you wanted to see and so forth. And almost everyone kind of sat there for a while, and they said, well, what have you done for everyone else? So what we have found is our best implementation model now is we put in kind of a base product of what we've seen at the majority of places. And that's what I'm going to show you here today. This just comes right out of the box. Then what we do is we work with you to customize it. So on this webinar, for instance, probably about half the people on are customers and half are not customers. So for you customers, some of you are at different stages of implementation. What we do is we'll work with you to modify this cube structure for what you want. So maybe you want to see buyer, maybe you don't want to see buyer. Maybe you have item attributes, maybe you don't have item attributes. Those kind of things will customize the contents. And what a cube has in it are really two types of data. The first thing I'm going to show you is called a factor, a measure, and that shows up at the top of the list over here in the cube pivot table. So what we're doing here is just basically creating a pivot table, and at the top of the list is anything that's a number. So depending on the cube you're looking at, you're going to see different facts or measures in there representing numbers. So for instance, in the PO cube, we might want to see the quantity of items. So I could take that quantity and drag that down, and you're going to see it show up over here on the left. Now what a cube does is it takes whatever numbers you're looking at and it totals it up to a grand total for all the other combinations of what you're looking at. So right now in my system, I've got 3,659 items. You'll obviously have way more than that in your system. But it's kind of a meaningless number at this point because I have to give it some context of what I'm looking at it. And so if I collapse this measure area up here, down below here, you're going to see a number of other items, and these are called dimensions. And dimensions are the things we're going to break up or group those numbers by. So instead of just saying what are the total of all quantity of all items, I want to give it some context. Now, the first thing you'll want to do on your system is filter as much as possible. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a PO date item, for instance, here, and I'm going to put that PO date hierarchy in the filter, and that'll show up over here on the left. And now I can say, what is the quantity for maybe 2009? I have 60 items. At that point, then, when I have a sufficient filter that I think it'll narrow it down to be a manageable data set, I can start adding other things. Maybe I want to go to my items dimension, and I can look at things by different hierarchies, which are roll-ups. So I can see things, items by purchasing class or sales classes, or I can go under this more fields and see individual pieces of data about that. Think of this like the item table or the item master table and the individual fields under that table. So maybe I want the description of the items. So if I do that, it's going to break down my quantities by the description of the items for that PO date that I've done. And you can really start adding whatever combinations of things you want here. What I always show is the vendor, for instance. Maybe I want to see the vendors related to those purchase orders. So if I go under vendor, maybe I'll see the vendor S name. I'll put that in front of the description. And so now I have by vendor, the items, the items that are, or the quantity of items that are on purchase orders. And the reason I clarify on purchase orders is we're looking at the PO cube right now. Every cube has what's called granularity, which is what is the deepest level it goes and what's the subject that makes it up. Our PO cube is really driven around PO lines. So our cube goes down to the PO line level, and anything we can relate to the PO line level can go into this cube. So right now I'm looking at all the different items at the PO line level by that. So 2009, by vendor, the items that are there. I mentioned we do the same kind of thing for requisitions, where it goes down to the requisition line level. IC down to the inventory transaction level. And then we have AP for the invoices and so forth. A common question I get is, well, I want to see not just PO, but I want to see PO with what's invoiced, or on the invoice what's on a PO. We can do that in a cube, but just know that it's coming from the perspective of one versus the other at a cube level. And what I mean by that is, because this is the PO line level, we can add invoice data in here, but it's only going to bring in the invoice data related to the purchase order lines that are there. It's not going to do all AP transactions if they didn't have purchase orders. Or on the AP side, we can put PO data, but it's going to only include those purchase orders that are related to the AP at that point. So a cube is a little bit limited in that regard, in that it's always coming at it from one perspective and not kind of across both perspectives. In our SQL data mart, well, I'll show you a bunch of tables where you can get away from that limitation, but just know that if you're looking at it from a cube, it's always coming at it from the lens of one area or another. Now, the other question I get asked a lot is, when else don't cubes work well? And cubes are not designed to show a lot of details. You know, here I have a pretty small subset. What Microsoft recommends from a scope of a cube query is to not show them more than about 10,000 cells of data. So that might be, 1,000 lines long by 10 columns wide, or it might be 10,000 lines long by 1 column wide, but about 10,000. That's not a hard and fast rule, so you can go more than that, and obviously you can have less than that, but just know that around 10,000 is about a limitation. So where cubes work good is if I wanted to say, show me the total I spent by vendor for 2009 for, a particular department, or show me by buyer, what did I spend, that kind of thing, where it's summarized in nature, or you can filter it down in nature. So for instance, like here, I could have taken vendor up here and put on here, and I could have said Kodak, I saw was one of them, so I'll go down to Kodak here. I could put vendor up in the filter, and I could say, show me what we bought from Kodak in 2009. Or if I wanted to get rid of the hierarchy on that, show me what we bought from Kodak all time, and it would show me the items and the quantity and so forth. And I could put PO date, down in the rows down here. So like I could have went under PO date, instead of putting a hierarchy, I could have put the PO date next to description, and it would break down by each PO date what we bought, and I could have put PO number and so forth. So under this PO line details, I do have all the details to that. So maybe instead of PO date, I'm going to put the full description, which is kind of a combination of, and this is a customizable line description that kind of combines together a bunch of PO statistics under there. So I could put that kind of thing in there to get that. But just know that Cube is designed really for summary type data, and you can get to the details, but you just want to be filtered down to a small enough set. Now, everything that I'm showing you here in this is just Excel. So when I've been navigating around and doing things, this is just pure Excel. All that we did in our data mart is create this cube over here on the right. So we structured the data, but everything else you're doing is standard Excel. And the reason I highlight that, if you're using other tools like, one of our Memorial Health down in Fort Lauderdale, they use Pyramid Analytics, which is, they use that to view cubes. Or you IBI users, there's a tool in there called the App Studio. That's part of Infor Business Intelligence, and that views cubes, so that would sit on top. So you can use a variety of different tools. So I'm just showing you here in Excel, and all the rules and things you can do over here are all governed by Excel, and there's a lot of cool things you can do there. So like, whatever the tool can do, this isn't very real world, but if I go out here and I insert a chart, I could do like a pie chart on that, and it's going to show me my pie chart of the data that I've got in there, just using Excel functionality. So if you're good at Excel, you'll feel right at home with this. So that's really cubes. And like I said, on the supply chain side, it's somewhat, hit or miss who uses cubes with it. It is good for that kind of quick question. What did we buy from this vendor? What did we, what it makes up an expense amount for a particular account unit or an account, that kind of thing works really good in a cube. So that's there. Our financial folks tend to live in Excel, but supply chain is a hit or miss on that. Where the next level comes in, and actually I'm going to pause for a second and just see if there's any questions out here on there. Yeah, so there was one question asked here, can you combine data across cubes? So I mentioned earlier about like AP has invoices, and PO has, the purchase orders. I can put AP data in the PO cube and PO data in the AP cube, but if you wanted to query across cubes, it's going to depend on the tool that you're using. So for instance, Excel has two modes to look at data in a cube. One is the way I'm showing you here, which is just drag and drop. The other way is through using formulas, which takes a little more work to build a report, but basically I can say equals cube, and it will give you formulas that you can extract data directly out of the cube. And at that point, you can create formulas that say, give me the total of invoices from AP cube and give me the total of POs from the PO cube and put it here, or, you can mix and match. So through formulas, you can cross cubes in Excel, but through the drag and drop interface, you can't. So what I usually do for most of our customers is I try to put into the cubes whatever you want that will make that life easier. So if you want the invoice numbers in the PO cube, you just have to let us know and we'll do that. Or on the AP side, if you want the PO numbers, we can put those in there. But it makes it a little bit easier using Excel. Some of the other tools make it where you can do the drag and drop crossing cubes. So there's not a global answer to that, other than it'll depend on the tool that you're using. Cubes are not real-time, so that's the other question I got was, is this going directly to Lawson? If you refer back to my chart that I put here, what we're doing is we're taking the data and processing it to get it to the cube. So on the supply chain side, what we do typically is nightly. These are scheduled, and most of our customers find on the supply chain side we process it nightly. And so as a result, cubes are good for, like what I was showing you there, purchase type data. What did I buy from this vendor or last month? What they're not good for is like real-time inventory or something like that. If you need real-time, then you're going to have to go more through our data mart, which can have views back that are real-time. But cubes are definitely not real-time. They have to go through a process, and that's what allows you to kind of walk through the data and navigate through the data quickly because things are pre-calculated for you behind the scenes. All right. So I'm going to move on from the cubes. The next type of thing I'm going to show you is our reporting data mart and other types of reports. So whereas cubes are good at summaries and ad hoc type reporting, when you want to look at other types of data, what you're going to want to do is use a different tool. And there's a whole bunch of them out there, whether you're using Crystal or SQL reporting services or Tableau or ClickView or whatever you want to use. You can use a variety of tools to do that. Now, what I like to do is use this product called SQL Reporting Services as a report writer tool to show demos. And the reason for that is we have a bunch of sample reports that we have as part of our product. And I just brought up our supply chain reports sample database. Now, what you can do in this tool is, I'll usually show this supply chain dashboard as the first one because it's got a little more character to it than a boring report. What reports work out in this tool is at the top there's what are called parameters, where you can say I want to give the user the ability to select different date ranges or companies or entities, that kind of thing. And then the bottom can be either detailed type reports or charts and graphs. So we call this one our supply chain dashboard, and it's an example of some different charts that you can do and the different types of data that you can get at. And then I'll dive into what does it take to get to something like this. So like on these, you can create like drill down type reports. So I clicked on the line that said open purchase order lines, and it gave me more of a detailed listing of those open purchase order lines. Within that, you can have other reports. So like the purchase order number here is highlighted. It says 343. If I click on that, what it's going to do is it's going to go into a purchase order detail report, which shows me the details of that purchase order. And this one has a requisition. So I could click on the requisition and go to the details behind that. So what we do in our data mart is you could take and write those reports today on your Infor database. What you'd have to do is you'd have to join distribution, the PO line source, the PO rec line, to the all those different tables that you'd have to know how to make all those joins. And so in our data mart, what we do is we bring over all those source tables. So you have MN distribution and PO line and PO rec line and PO line source. So it's a copy of those. But then in addition to that, we put other tables on top of it that simplify that down to where you don't have to use all of that detailed joins as often as you normally would. So it simplifies the process. As a result, the reports also run much faster. So not only is it easier to create those, but it's much more efficient to run those reports. So you're able to do, building a dashboard like this and have it come up without, taking forever, and have it combine all my spend and all of that together. And how we do that is we do what's called pre-aggregate the data as well as denormalize it. So a lot of work that you do as a report writer when you're writing a report is saying, I want to join, from the PO line, the vendor number, I want to get the vendor name. So I got to join out to the vendor master to get the vendor name, or the item master to get the item name, that kind of thing. It's a lot of joining, and as a result, it slows down the system, not only from a writing, but also from a running perspective. What we do is we pre-join those common things together into tables that make that process easy. Now, I was struggling with, on the financial side, we've got a few, and they're very easy to show. On the supply chain side, we've got, a few different ones, but there's a new one, and I thought I'm going to show a new table for those of you that are our customers that maybe haven't seen it, and that's called GL with Subsystem. And it's somewhat of a financial table, and it's somewhat of a supply chain table. If you want a pure supply chain version of it, it's going to be called SC Spend Facts is the supply chain version is called SC Spend Facts. But for a more rolled up version, for those of you that have our financial product as well as supply chain, there's one that's called GL with Subsystem. And for our longtime customers, it's one that we just started rolling out, so it's one that we'd have to apply and upgrade for you, and we can definitely do that. But we got asked a lot of questions about, we have in general ledger, so on the financial side, a bunch of postings. And really what we want to do from a reporting perspective often is we want the details that make up those account distributions. What do we spend? Someone gets a report that says this is what we spent by department, and I need to know the details. Or there's RNI transactions for received not invoiced, and we want to know what the details are that make that up. What we've done in this table is basically taken all of the GL transactions that were posted from like a RNI PO 135 and replaced those with the details that make that up. So we have the purchase order details that make up that RNI transaction, or the INR for the invoice not received, or if they're an inventory transaction, IC trans, we have all that items and all the details in there. So instead of writing a report on dist and PO line and PO rec line and all of those, we have those all collapsed in this one table called GL with Subsystem. So what I'll do, actually, I'm going to show you just some screen prints of a report. This is actually a report of a customer. I should get rid of the title down there. I just took screenshots, so it's going to be a little bit fuzzy. I show this here, maybe. Let's swap that out. It's going to be a little bit fuzzy on what you see here, but I'm going to go through a process of a few screenshots. And this customer actually is doing training on this to their users tomorrow, and it was a spend performance dashboard. And what we did to get here, they're doing training for all their users on how to do it tomorrow, but they had a use case where they wanted to know by department, for each department manager, what they were spending their money on, and if it was coming from purchase order spend or accounts payable spend, was it service, that kind of thing, and if it was a good or bad. So they have a chart over here on the left that has their total expense spend. They have a chart here if it was spend on supplies, so they categorize certain accounts as supply spend, or if it was coming from service spend, it would be here. So supplies and service, and then this one to the right are things that were bought not using a purchase order, so a direct AP invoice item. They were trying to narrow that down. And they wanted charts that compared budget, and that's the item in gray, which was what was budgeted, to their actual, which is either the green or red. If it extended past their budget, it was red, and if it was within budget, it was green. On this first dashboard, it just shows the top 10 accounts for each of those. And then if they click expand, what it does is it goes to all of them, not just the top 10, kind of breaking it out that way. And then what they did was if you click on one of the bars, it gives you a drill down of that, of all the details that make up that. So it shows that. Now, to get to that point, what we had to do is we had to go through a series of questions, and this goes back to what I said at the beginning. We have some customers that say we want to treat everything on a PO as what was spent, except for those extra charges, add-on costs like freight and that. Then we want that to come from AP. Or on the PO side, we want things that when they're received to be considered when they're spent within the date range and so forth. So we define those rules for them. And then once we did that, we used those rules to apply the filters to two different tables we have. And one of them being that GL with subsystem that I'm going to show you shortly. And then the next key thing we had by that is what each user sees is unique to them based on using what we call our report distribution kit, which I'll show you in a minute. So one user might see the operating room, for instance, account unit. They use the term cost center is what they use, but a lot of people would use account unit from the Lawson terminology, or department, some people do. Some users would see just the operating room. Some users would see the operating room, the pharmacy, the cardio, whatever theirs were, or multiple ones. So the reports were always filtered down based on their context for each user. So we also define that as part of our report distribution kit, which I'll show you that in a minute as well. But what I want to do is I want to get into that GL with subsystem and show you what it took to kind of build out a report like that using that table. So if I come back here to, I'm going to go back here to the SQL reporting services. And this part here might get a little bit technical because I am going to actually build a report using it just to show that, but it'll highlight some of the things within the tables. You'll see some of these samples out here have things like, usage, which is another term that one of our customers wanted for spend, so that's why you see it called usage, but it might be spend by vendor. You might see some inventory things, some of those things, but I'm going to build out kind of a detailed report that gets into the spend for a particular account, let's say. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to open up this tool, which is Report Builder. You could use Crystal, or you could use Burst, or you could use Tableau, whatever tool you want to use. I was working with someone this morning that was using Tableau on the same thing. So you can use whatever tool as long as it can connect to SQL Server to build that report. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to build a report that's going to go to that GL with subsystem table. So that's in my supply chain database that I've got here on my laptop. So I'm just going to do next. I'll go to my tables, and it's going to show a number of tables that I have in my system. And the one I'm going to focus on is this GL with subsystem. Now, I mentioned earlier that what we do in a lot of our tables is try and simplify it down. You're going to see a lot of the fields, like company. You're going to see a name field, which is like the description for it, or the account unit and the account unit name. We put those right in here so that you don't have to do a join back and forth. But if there is something you want to join to, by all means, you have the ability to join. So you still can join out. So a lot of questions I get, well, what if I want something that's not in here? You still can do it. We're not limiting that down. We're just trying to put as much in here as we can, and then you can go from there. So maybe I want to do just a simple report where in here, what this table is doing is it's taking everything that's posted through to General Ledger or hits General Ledger in any way comes into here, whether it be from IC or PO or AP, whatever it does, it's getting in here, and then we replace those lines with more information. So a lot of you post summarized and so forth. So maybe I want to come down here and I want to say, well, I want to see everything that is the description that's coming out of General Ledger, that's GL Trans. I want to see all of the item descriptions that are coming out of there. You'll notice there's PO numbers that are in here. If you wanted to show the invoice number, if it applied, PO line number. I mean, I could do a lot of different things here. I want to see the vendor name. Obviously, this won't be a pretty report. I'll just put a bunch of I'll put a bunch of things in here. This tool here also allows you to filter very easily, where I can just say add a filter. I want to filter this for a particular, I can do it for a particular posting date, or what I'll do in my case is I'm going to pick a fiscal year and say the fiscal year is a hard-coded value in my case. I'll say 2009, and I'll add a filter in here for a particular period that I'm looking at. So maybe I want to see this for, we'll do a particular period, and I'll say period 2 of 2009. And then I want to do this for an account. I can do an account. I just wanted to list this for one account number for that period. But in this case, I don't want to make that a hard-coded account. I want to make it a parameter so I can just switch accounts whenever I want. So that's all you do on this tool is basically you pick the fields you want, you pick the filters you want, and then I can come out here and lay out a nice report by just dropping in my line number. I don't want to sum that up. So I can lay out kind of a grid. This would be an ugly report, like I said, but we'll do finish. And now we've got kind of a different tabular type report where I'm going to show each description, the item, the PO line, and so forth. If I run this right now, what it's going to do is first compile it. It's going to ask me for the account because I said I want to make that a parameter. So like I said earlier, parameters are anything I want to ask questions of the user to run. So I'm putting in their parameter 5023. That's my account number. And if I view that, what it's going to do is go through that GL with Subsystem. It's going to show me the GL transaction description, which those of you that have wrote reports on that, you'll see this received, not invoice, came from PO 135. But now we have each item description. I could have put the PO line description on here too, but I just put the item description, the vendor, the PO number, the line number. It breaks it down, and I should have put the amount on here. Not a very good report, but hopefully you got the, actually I can go back and add that. So at any time if you want to add something, all I do is I come in here and say I want to modify this, go back to my report here, and I'll just add in the distribution amount into that as well, and I'll add that into my report. I'll put that right here between the descriptions. Now when I run it, same thing. I can put in 5023, and now I'll have my distribution amount. So by line, it's going to break out that. If I would have put in the GL transaction amount, I would have saw the grand total for this particular GL transaction, so maybe 100,000, and it breaks up all the details that make up that 100,000 here. So you have access to both the summarized total as well as each detail that makes that up. So it makes it much easier to do that. Now, because it has the PO number and the line number and it's got the invoice and all that, if you do want more information than we're putting in there, it's very easy then at that point just to join out to those tables for that detail. So for instance, on the dashboard here that I was working on here, we could very easily have put a link on the invoice to launch maybe MHC's invoice image if you have an imaging system or something like that. So you have the ability to kind of customize and do all of that. So the moral of the story, I guess, on what I was showing you here with the GL with Subsystem is the details are there, but then we have the summarized tables that we wrap over the top of it to make that process easier and faster to write those reports. Now, the next part I'll show you is I mentioned that customer that had that dashboard, they also filtered it by user. We do have another tool that many of you might not be aware of that works with the SQL reporting services, that what that does is it personalizes the reports for who can see what. So, for instance, I've got kind of a boring report here it says rich testing, but it's a report that says my company's for, and all it is a company listing of all the companies in my database. Well, I've given myself access only to see companies that start with 1. So I see company 1 and company 100. We have this tool that's called the Report Distribution Toolkit. Sometimes I call it the Data Distribution Toolkit, where by user, I can specify filters. And the filter here is company, where I can say for my user ID, my company equals 1 asterisk, which means anything that starts with 1. I could very easily have said, you know what, I can only see companies that start with 2. And what that's going to do is it's going to save that off. Now when I go back to my folder here, and if I run this company 4 again, Now I only see companies that start with 2. What that's doing is you can map that to any report in the system, and it'll filter that report based on the user ID for what they can see. So that company that we put in that supply chain dashboard, for instance, they mapped users to cost centers, and it filtered the reports and all the drill downs based on the cost centers that they can see. They also have an executive summary report. They've got about, I don't know, 20 or so companies, and their executive summary report filtered by company and not cost center. And so that summarized that down that way. So you can create filters at whatever level that you want for any data element that you want that's part of a SQL Server table. So you can define that in there. Common question I get is, can you tie it to loss and security? Actually, I just got that. Paul just asked the question of that. Can you tie it to loss and security? It's not a direct tie, but you definitely can script that in there, and we've done that before. So basically, there's a set of SQL Server tables that we're front-ending with our tool. We get the data into a format that matches that table, and usually what I do is I just create an interface that gets it to either a CSV file or something that matches that, and then we can load it in. So it's pretty straightforward to do that, to tie that in there. And elements can be more complex than just a simple cost center or company. They can be tied into like combinations of company and account unit. So they can be more complex. So it's not a direct tie to loss and security, but it definitely can be scripted or interfaced in to do that. I know at one of the health systems we used, they had a product by another partner called AVAP that's out there. I don't know if there's anyone from AVAP on our call, but they have a security tool that exposed data, and I know Kinsey has it, and some of the other ones have a security tool. We tapped into that, and we were able to just directly kind of interface through that. So the AVAP tool connected to Lawson, and then we were able to extract from the AVAP tool directly in. We wrote an interface. So that makes it a little easier. The problem with the loss and security is that it's a little bit of a challenge to connect directly to. You have to go into the gen tables and kind of extract things that way. An Active Directory is involved, but it is technically possible to do. All right, I'm going to pause for a second and see if there's any other questions coming in. There's one around, so on the cube side, you know, I mentioned the supply chain master cube. So back here I showed PO. We have one called the supply chain master cube. The reason we started out separating like PO and MMDist is the amounts are very different depending on how you're looking at it. So like quantity is a good example. If I have a CAT scan machine and I'm looking at a quantity, that's a 1. I got one machine. Oftentimes that's split amongst many departments. So MMDist will take and divide that, let's say 50% to one department and 50% to another. Well, you're not going to split the quantity, you know, 0.5 and 0.5 between them. The dollar amounts are pretty straightforward, but the quantities you can't. So in MMDist, the quantities get very different when you're looking at values versus PO lines. So what we tend to do is if you're looking at it from an expense perspective, then you'll use the MMDist cube. If you're looking at it from a PO line perspective, you'll use the PO line cube. The supply chain master cube puts them together, but you have to understand that there's that difference between MMDist quantities and PO lines. And so if you put a PO line quantity on something and say show by department, it's going to inflate that quantity out. It's going to multiply it because it's going to show 1 on 2 different departments in my example. And you're going to say, well, we don't have 2 CAT scan machines. And it's because in MMDist it shows 1 under both. So that just have to know that going in. That if you use the supply chain master, you have to have a little bit more knowledge. But separate, it makes a little more sense. Implementation time frame is about a week to put in our data marks. So I say that, and I say that some of you will say, well, we're a customer and it took much more than a week. What happens in a week is we're able to get what I call that base implementation. Everything I showed you here was the base implementation. We put that in a week. The next phase we go to, as part of our maintenance, we'll change it whenever you want it. So all you do is you get assigned a main client account rep. Your client account rep is the person that's responsible for changing it. So when you want to you want to add something. Let's say you started using item attributes and you want to add item attributes in. You would send a note to your item account rep and say, we need item attributes. They add that in. You don't need any technical resources at all. They will take care of adding it all in there. We say usually give us a week to do that. Usually it happens much sooner than that. What happens is we'll do that for as long as you're on maintenance. So we have some customers that talk to us, I'll say every week or every other week. I get requests from some of my customers that way. I've got other ones that I talk to once a year with requests. So it varies greatly just depending on how deep you're getting into it and what you're doing. I have some that use our out-of-the-box reports and have customized those. So, when I go back here and I showed you the sample reports, we deliver these reports as samples to get you started. So like the supply chain dashboard, I'll run this and you'd get this report. Well, you're going to say total spent not on contract. Well, this is assuming that you're using Lawson for your contracts. Many of you use GHX or something else to track contracts. So there's some mapping or customization that you would have to do to these reports. So our first thing is we drop in the base, and then after that, then there's a process that goes through. And that usually settles down within a month. So it's usually, realistically, within a month, you're settled down to the data set that you want. What we do is we'll put in the base. We usually ask for a report like the MM280 or something like that to use as a sanity check to make sure that we've tied everything. I know all of you are familiar with that report, backwards and forwards. It's a love-hate relationship with that one, but we usually ask for that, and that just gives us an idea if we're tying things inappropriately. And that's kind of the process we go through, and then we'll repeat that for as long as needed. All right, I'm gonna pause here again and just see if there's any other questions or anything that anyone has. Any questions? The price, so that's one that no one's asked that question, but I'm going to say the price is $30,000 for supply chain. It's $30,000 for finance and $30,000 for HR. So it's for each one, and that includes the software, our installation charge, and that first-year maintenance. So we'll put that in. What's included on the supply chain side is all the PO, REX, IC, MMDist. AP is over on the finance side. So realistically, you'll probably, almost all of our customers that buy supply chain also have finance because they want to be able to navigate between AP and supply chain to make that tie over between invoice and POs and what did you spend and all of that. We can offer a slimmed down version of finance for a little bit less than that, but you'll get the best experience if you have finance and supply chain together. Just honestly, that's the most seamless thing where you can go all the way from the top of an account all the way down to the requisition that got you there. So that gives you the most flexibility within that. And yep, it does. One question around activities. We do tie into all the activities. So those of you that are using activities, if we can link that in. Ongoing maintenance costs. I just got a question on that. Right now it's at 20%, so $6,000 per year after the first year is what the current maintenance cost is. So we'll upgrade you. So let's say you're on premise today, and you decide to move to the cloud later. That's included in the maintenance. We'll remap it and repoint it to that. So as long as you're upgrading Lawson and so forth, then we'll do that. So that maintenance cost is per module, so $6,000 for supply chain, $6,000 for finance, $6,000 for HR if you owned all three of ours. And then we do have Kronos as well. That one's $20,000, so that one's less on the Kronos side just because there's less to it to do. And I should say that out loud, but there's Kronos people would shoot me. It's easier to put that one in. All right. So if you own both finance and supply chain, it would be $12,000 after the first year. So the first year it's included. You don't. need any technical resources, we do require that you have a SQL Server. So, you know, we'll source the data from Oracle, SQL Server, or DB2, and that can be out in the cloud or on-premise. We read that, we put that into a SQL Server that we recommend you put on-premise. Doesn't have to be technically, but I do recommend that you put that on-premise. And then those are put on-premise that way, and then you can do whatever you want. So we do require you to have a SQL license, but the nice thing is that'll replicate. You can do whatever you want. It's not on live. There was a question that was asked about when you're clarify when I'm creating reports, is it against the SQL table or the dashboard gear tables? The answer to that is you can do both. I recommend you go against the dashboard gear tables, and that's what you're seeing, but we do have links back to the direct back to the Lawson tables as well. So you can write them either place, but the SQL tables are dashboard gear tables that we've replicated and added in the added calculations and so forth too. So that's where I say if you can start writing them there, that way it does not affect your Infor system at all. The other benefit of that is, let's say you're a cloud provider, then you're connecting to your SQL on-premise, and if you want to join it with things like, let's say, an item master and Epic for you healthcare people, or student information systems for your schools, that kind of thing, all of that's available for you to kind of combine and join that too where it makes sense. So the question was, how do you handle invoicing by cost center and PO by cost center reporting? Basically, by the type of transaction, you can specify what you want to use as your driver. And so you define a rule up front that says if it's an AP add-on cost type transaction, then I want that to come from the, in those of you that know the tables, it's basically AP Distrib has all the costs from an AP perspective. If you want to look at it from a PO perspective, then we drive that back through the MMDist table, has the transactions for that. In the case of that sample dashboard I did, they added a third layer, and that they wanted all the costs associated with IC inventory transactions as well. And in those cases, we drove those off of the IC trans table. So you specify basically at the granularity of the type of transaction that's going to drive that rule, and then our table has those flags in it, so it knows which one to pull that from based at that point. So that's how you get at it. There's no hard and fast. If you're going directly at the Lawson tables, the main tables you use for that is if it's an invoicing type transaction, it's AP Distrib, and that's what you'd have to use as your driver of those costs. GL Trans has those, but they're usually summarized, and so to get to the invoice, you have to get the AP Distrib. For PO, you do the MM Distrib or MM Dist, and you know, usually there's one level added complexity there, and that's if it was received or not. And that's where in our GL with Subsystem, we've removed that complexity and kind of made that assumption for you based on the receipt. We have the receipt date and all that in there. There was a question here. If we use GHX, would linking to GX be included in maintenance? The answer to that is no. That would be a custom thing. We've done that on a number of customers, but it's not something that's part of our normal maintenance. GHX is, how should I say, very protective of their data and their system, and they don't give direct access too often. So the process usually that's done to interface with that is usually you can get a CSV type feed or a report that we've scraped off, and then we import that into a SQL Server table that we've merged. Now, we would do that as an added consulting effort, or if you have technical resources, you can do that. Because our database is just a SQL Server database, you can put whatever extra data you want in there, or if you have SQL resources, you could add your own views and tables and stored procedures and do all that. Or if you don't have any resources and you want our help, because we've done that a lot, our consultants can add in or merge to any system you want. So we've done, like I said, GHX, we've done extracts there, we've done Epic, a lot of Epic work, Cerner, McKesson, budgeting systems. Some of our systems have exported data out to EPSI. or in from another system, so go either way. But we approach anything that's not coming from or going to Infor as a custom consulting. And I shouldn't say going to, because we only pull data out of Infor. If we need to put something back to Infor, which we can do, like budgeting type data, then we do that as consulting as well. So basically what's included in our maintenance is maintaining the data mart of pulling the data and doing that from Infor Lawson, or if you had our Kronos one, from the Kronos system. James, I hope I answered your questions on the maintenance costs earlier on that. All right, I'm going to glance here. Typical users of our system, it really varies. The users are everyone from, on the Cube side, it's usually a very small subset. Usually it's analysts, power analysts that are looking at it. So it's not something you usually give to the masses. From a report authoring, it's usually, here again, a small set as well. From a report distribution, that's a big set. So depending on the report, this can go, as deep down the chain as you want. On the HR side, we've had people give reports to every employee they've had. So it just depends on the report and its nature. But usually from an authoring, it's a fairly small set, and from a cube, it's a fairly small set. But a viewer of a report, it's usually pretty broad. And how you do that's going to vary by the tool. And like I said, we can help you with that. If you don't have reporting expertise, we can usually build these reports very economical and very quick. But if you don't, we can also do a class to teach you. So for instance, this SQL reporting services, I usually say is about a 3-day process to learn how to build reports and about how to, create folders and distribute them and all of that kind of thing. It's about a 3-day process to do it. 1 day to learn the tool, and then usually we have people build reports side by side for a couple days. All right. I'm going to just pause for a second here, and as I'm doing that, I'm going to come out here to just put up this slide here. And I'm going to swap that again. I need to get that fixed. So there's our contact information. If you do have any questions, don't hesitate to contact myself or Tom, who's on our sales staff. Either send us an email or whatever, and we'd be happy to answer whatever questions you have that way. We're going to be at the Midwest User Group tomorrow, so any of you that are in the Midwest area, down at St. Olaf College, they're having a user group. In Northfield, Minnesota, we're going to be there. Next month, we're doing a webinar on finance. We don't have the date set, I don't believe, as of yet. And then we're starting a process out on our website, www.dashboardgear.com. We have a resources section that I'm starting to get a little bit better about posting periodic helps and how-tos. The last one I did was on analysis services security, which is cubes, and how to set that, put that out there. I'm trying to be better at recording those things and trying to get some of my consultants to do more. But so we're hopefully going to do one a week where we'll post out there. So stay tuned to that and check that out if you have any questions. Other than that, I'm just going to pause here for a bit and see if there's other questions. And if not, I'll be shutting down here in a little bit. So thank you all for attending, and hopefully you found it was useful.